In the ancient world of Israel and Judah, where kingdoms rose and fell by the hand of kings and prophets, one woman's legacy stands out, dark, powerful, and tragic. Her name was Athaliah, a queen whose life was marked by ambition, intrigue, and a relentless thirst for power. But to understand Athaliah, we must first travel back to where it all began, to the roots of her lineage, a family tree shadowed by idolatry and ruthless ambition. Before you dive in, ask yourself, what happens when darkness wears a crown? Tap in, subscribe, and journey through the most chilling, suspense-filled story of Judah's darkest queen, Athaliah. Don't just watch history, experience it. Athaliah was the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel, a pair whose names are forever etched in the Bible as symbols of wickedness and rebellion against God. King Ahab ruled over the northern kingdom of Israel during a time of deep spiritual corruption. His marriage to Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, brought not only political alliances but also the introduction of Baal worship into Israel, igniting a spiritual battle that would define their reign. Jezebel's relentless promotion of Baal, a false god worshipped by many neighboring peoples, led to widespread idolatry, persecution of the prophets of Yahweh, and a nation teetering on the brink of divine judgment. Athaliah grew up amidst this chaos, surrounded by the seductive lure of power and the dark rituals of Baal worship. She witnessed firsthand how her mother Jezebel wielded influence with deadly precision, crushing opposition and ruling with an iron fist. The Bible paints Jezebel as a figure of manipulation and cruelty, and Athaliah inherited much of that fierce spirit. Her childhood was not one of innocence but of careful learning, where power was both the prize and the weapon. As political tensions simmered between Israel and Judah, Athaliah became a key piece in a larger chess game of royal alliances. She married Jehoram, the king of Judah, uniting the northern and southern kingdoms in a bond meant to strengthen their rule and secure peace. This marriage was not a simple union of hearts but a strategic move designed to intertwine two very different realms. Jehoram was part of the Davidic line, a descendant of King David himself, ruling over Judah, the southern kingdom that was meant to remain loyal to Yahweh. Athaliah, with her bloodline steeped in Baal worship, brought with her the dangerous influence of Israel's corrupted faith. The marriage between Athaliah and Jehoram did not just merge two royal families. It brought a spiritual collision that would have devastating consequences. Jehoram's reign saw an alarming shift. He led Judah into the same idolatrous practices that his wife's family had embraced. The Bible tells us that Jehoram walked in the way of the kings of Israel, forsaking the covenant with God and worshipping Baal and other idols. This spiritual decay paved the way for Athaliah's later rule, where the worship of false gods would become the dark shadow over Judah. Athaliah and Jehoram's union produced a son named Ahaziah, the rightful heir to the throne of Judah. Ahaziah inherited not only the crown but also the heavy legacy of his parents, a kingdom divided in faith and loyalty. His reign was short and troubled, marked by alliances with Israel and further compromises in worship. The bloodline of David was at risk, caught in a web of political intrigue and spiritual betrayal. But Athaliah's story was far from over. Behind the palace walls, her ambitions grew. She was no ordinary queen consort. She was a force of nature, shaped by a lifetime of exposure to ruthless power and unyielding faith in Baal. Her influence over Jehoram and Ahaziah set the stage for events that would shake Judah to its core. The throne was more than a seat of power. It was a prize worth fighting for, a symbol of divine favor that Athaliah would stop at nothing to claim. As we close this chapter on Athaliah's background, the foundations of a dark saga have been laid. The daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, married into the royal line of Judah, poised between two worlds, the worship of Yahweh and the worship of Baal. This is the story of a queen whose reign would be unlike any other, a reign marked by blood, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power. But what comes next? How did Athaliah seize the throne, and what price would Judah pay for her rule? The answers lie ahead, in the shadows of history and the pages of Scripture. When King Ahaziah, the son of Athaliah and Jehoram, died suddenly after a brief and troubled reign, the kingdom of Judah was thrown into chaos. His death was not just a moment of grief, It was the spark that ignited one of the most ruthless and dramatic power grabs in biblical history. Athaliah, a queen forged in the fires of ambition and dark influence, saw an opportunity that few would dare to seize, a chance to claim the throne for herself. Ahaziah's death left the throne vacant, but more importantly, it left behind a lineage of rightful heirs, children who, by all rights, should have taken their place as rulers of Judah. Yet Athaliah had no intention of letting her grandchildren rise and threaten her grip on power. What followed next was an act of chilling calculation and merciless determination. Athaliah orchestrated the slaughter of all royal heirs. This was no ordinary purge. It was a brutal cleansing designed to eliminate every rival, every claimant to the throne, her own flesh and blood. The Bible, in 2 Kings 11 and 2 Chronicles 22, reveals the terrifying depths of Athaliah's ambition. She did not hesitate to murder her grandchildren, wiping out an entire generation of David's descendants in a single, bloody sweep. The sheer horror of this act cannot be overstated. In ancient Judah, the royal bloodline was sacred, the continuation of God's covenant with David, and here was Athaliah, breaking that covenant with cold-blooded violence. Her reign was stained with the blood of her own family, a grim testament to the lengths she would go to secure her power. But why was Athaliah so determined to claim the throne? The answer lies in her heritage and the spiritual battle raging beneath the surface of Judah's politics. She was the daughter of Jezebel, a woman who had ruled Israel through fear and idolatry. Jezebel had championed the worship of Baal, a false god whose priests practiced dark rituals and led the people away from the God of Israel. Athaliah inherited not only this legacy but the same relentless drive to impose her will and her gods upon the people of Judah. When Athaliah declared herself queen, she became the only woman in Judah's history to rule in her own right. This was unprecedented, a bold, almost revolutionary act that sent shockwaves through the kingdom. For 6 years, Athaliah reigned over Judah, wielding power like a dark storm sweeping across the land. But her rule was not just about political control, it was a spiritual catastrophe. She led the people into deep idolatry, promoting Baal worship and other pagan practices that had long been condemned by the prophets of Yahweh. The biblical texts describe Athaliah's reign as one of the darkest periods in Judah's history. The altars of Baal were set up throughout Jerusalem, and the worship of false gods became the order of the day. This was a kingdom turned upside down, where the covenant with God was trampled and evil flourished. Athaliah's influence was felt in every corner, from the palace to the temple courts, as she sought to erase the worship of Yahweh and replace it with the cult of Baal. Her reign was marked by fear and oppression. The priests of Yahweh were silenced or killed, and those who remained lived in constant danger. The people of Judah, many of whom still clung to the faith of their ancestors, were forced into a dangerous dance between survival and resistance. The spiritual heart of the nation was bleeding, and the promise made to David, that his descendants would rule forever, seemed on the verge of collapse. Yet, even in this time of darkness, the story was far from over. Athaliah's brutal seizure of power planted seeds of rebellion and hope that would eventually sprout in the most unexpected way. The biblical narrative hints at a divine plan unfolding behind the scenes, one that would challenge Athaliah's reign and restore the rightful king to Judah's throne. But for now, Athaliah sat on the throne, a queen draped in power but shrouded in blood and idolatry. Her reign was a stark warning, a testament to what happens when ambition and evil collide, and when the covenant with God is broken. She ruled not as a servant of the God of Israel but as a pawn of darkness, her heart hardened and her hands stained with the blood of innocents. What would become of Judah under Athaliah's rule? How would the covenant line of David survive such a ruthless purge? These questions hung in the air like a storm ready to break, setting the stage for a dramatic and divine confrontation. The throne was hers, but for how long? As the kingdom trembled under her shadow, a quiet resistance was beginning to take shape, hidden away from the eyes of the tyrant queen. The next episode in this gripping story reveals how hope survived the darkest hour, hidden in the most unlikely of places. In the kingdom of Judah, silence had become the sound of fear. Since Athaliah's brutal rise to power, Jerusalem had shifted from a city of worship to a city of whispers. The palace that once echoed with the praises of Yahweh now stood like a fortress of oppression, and the temple, though still standing, had grown cold. Baal worship spread like a virus through the land, and Athaliah's black banners flapped across every street corner, casting long shadows on the people's hearts. But amid the mourning and chaos, somewhere deep in the heart of the city, the unimaginable was unfolding. A child had survived. The death orders had been swift. Athaliah had commanded the execution of all royal offspring, her own grandchildren, to secure her throne. Soldiers moved without mercy, swords drawn, eyes hardened. Every child with a claim to David's throne was hunted down like prey, slaughtered in cold blood. But in this darkness, God had planted a spark. Joash, the infant son of the late King Ahaziah, was only a baby when the massacre began. He should have died that day, like his brothers, like every child with royal blood. But while the city wailed and blood ran through the royal courts, a woman made a decision that would alter history. Her name was Jehosheba. She was no ordinary woman. Daughter of the late King Jehoram, sister to the murdered Ahaziah, and crucially, wife to Jehoiada, the high priest of Yahweh. Jehosheba saw what others didn't, the unraveling of Judah's spiritual foundation under Athaliah's grip. She saw the threat not only to the throne but to the covenant itself. And in the chaos of that terrible day, when swords screamed and the palace walls dripped with betrayal, she acted. Swiftly, fearlessly. She snatched Joash from the slaughter. Wrapped in silence, shielded by shadows, she cradled the infant in her arms and slipped past the royal guards. Each footstep felt like judgment. Each corner she turned could have been her death. But she kept moving. This was not just a rescue, it was a divine rebellion. She carried Joash through winding palace corridors, down hidden servant tunnels, into the sacred walls of the temple of the Lord. The same temple Athaliah had neglected. The same house of God she defiled with Baal worship. And there, in that holy place, Joash was hidden. Can you feel the tension rising? The line of David is hanging by a thread. One hidden child. One silent priest. If you haven't yet, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the twists still to come. For 6 long years, the boy king lived in hiding. The temple, once a place of public prayer, became a prison of secrecy and hope. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Jehosheba, Jehoiada, a few trusted Levites. The child was kept in a small, concealed chamber, surrounded by curtains and silence. He was not raised like a prince. There were no royal feasts, no golden cradles, no throne to climb. Instead, Joash heard prayers instead of political debates. He saw scrolls of the Torah instead of royal decrees. The scent of incense replaced the perfume of palace halls. And Jehoiada, the priest who served both God and Judah, became more than a guardian. He became a father, a mentor, a spiritual anchor. Outside those temple walls, Athaliah ruled unchecked. Her Baal priests danced in the streets. Altars to foreign gods rose where sacrifices to Yahweh once burned. The people groaned beneath her idolatrous reign. Many forgot the promises made to David. Some believed the line was dead forever. But Jehoiada had not forgotten. He remembered the covenant. He remembered the voice of God that once declared, "There shall not fail you a man to sit upon the throne of Israel." And though the world saw a dead dynasty, Jehoiada saw something else. A prophecy hiding in plain sight. As Joash grew, so did the danger. At first, it was simple, feeding a child, calming him when he cried. But with every year, the risk multiplied. A child could not be hidden forever. His laughter could betray him. His footsteps could echo at the wrong time. His innocent questions might be overheard by wandering priests or nosy guards. Athaliah had spies everywhere. Her paranoia had birthed an intelligence web across Jerusalem. She trusted no one, not even her own officials. Every whisper in the temple was a potential noose. Every shadow cast could be the eyes of death. Yet Joash survived. He learned in secret. Jehoiada and Jehosheba taught him about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They told him of Moses parting the Red Sea, of David slaying Goliath. They painted a picture of his grandfather Jehoshaphat, a man who once stood in the fear of the Lord. And they whispered the unthinkable. You, Joash, you are a son of David. One day, God will call you to sit on his throne. Joash's heart burned with a truth he didn't fully understand, but he carried it. He didn't yet grasp kingship, but he knew the weight of survival. He didn't yet wear a crown, but he bore the burden of a dying kingdom's hope. Jehoiada wasn't just keeping Joash alive, he was building a plan. Quietly, over 6 years, the high priest began to identify loyal men, soldiers, commanders, temple guards, who had not bowed to Baal. Men who still remembered the God of their fathers. Men who had been biding their time, waiting for something, or someone, to rise against the wicked queen. Jehoiada moved carefully. No notes. No public gatherings. Only whispers in corners, nods of agreement, secret meetings held under the guise of religious ritual. He was building a network within the temple, a quiet resistance, ready to explode at the right moment. Meanwhile, Athaliah remained blind. She believed her purge had been complete. The throne was hers. She ruled with cruelty but confidence. And though rumors swirled, rumors of a survivor, a hidden prince, she dismissed them as foolish superstition. Her guards mocked them. Her priests laughed. She was the queen, and there was no one left to challenge her. But God was working in the shadows. Imagine 6 years of waiting. 6 years of looking over your shoulder. 6 years of training a boy to be king when the world believed the line was extinct. Joash grew strong. Not in the ways of war, but in the ways of wisdom. He saw the temple every day, walked among sacred things, heard the songs of heaven. He didn't wear royal robes, but he learned what it meant to lead under God's authority. Jehoiada used these years not just to protect Joash, but to prepare Judah. The people, though afraid, were growing restless. Athaliah's reign brought no peace. Droughts plagued the land. Baal could not answer prayers. Crops withered. Children died. The favor of God had left the nation, and the people began to whisper again, not of fear, but of hope. Was someone coming? Was the line of David truly gone? Why had the temple not fallen? Why did Jehoiada seem so focused? The tension built like a storm cloud refusing to break. And in that atmosphere, the plan took shape. What would you do if your life depended on faith, not force? Leave a comment below. I stand with God's remnant. If you believe one faithful act can shake a nation, let's talk about it in the comments. In the 7th year, Jehoiada knew the moment had come. Joash was now old enough to be revealed. The boy was still a child, only 7 years old, but the covenant had waited long enough. Jehoiada summoned the commanders of hundreds, trusted men who had kept their faith in secret. He brought them into the temple, under oath, and unveiled the impossible. The boy lives. The king lives. Gasps filled the holy place. Grown men fell to their knees in shock. Eyes welled with tears. Some reached forward to touch the child, as if needing to confirm he was flesh and blood. The hidden seed of David stood before them, alive, alert, and anointed. And Jehoiada spoke with the fire of prophecy, "Now is the time. Let the trumpets sound again in Judah. Let the people see the heir. Let the queen tremble." The night before it all began, Jerusalem was quiet, too quiet. But not the peaceful kind. It was the hush of a city on the brink, like a storm gathering above rooftops while the people pretended not to notice. For 6 years, they had swallowed fear and watched Athaliah's reign poison everything pure. But that night, something shifted. The stars seemed sharper, the wind colder. And in the temple, the very temple she had defiled, destiny was stirring. Athaliah had ruled like a tyrant. She wasn't just a usurper. She was a shadow queen, a living mockery of God's covenant. With her Baal altars, foreign idols, and merciless decrees, she had nearly erased every trace of David's legacy. And she believed she had succeeded. But she was wrong. A boy had survived. The sun hadn't even risen when Jehoiada, the high priest, made his move. It was the 7th year. The hidden heir, Joash, was now 7 years old. And Jehoiada had waited long enough. Every second Joash remained hidden, Judah sank deeper into ruin. The silence had to end. The crown had to return to David's bloodline. That morning, Jehoiada summoned the commanders of the temple guards, men of valor, men who still feared Yahweh. These weren't average soldiers. They were strategically chosen, leaders of hundreds, responsible for divisions of men who rotated duty at the temple. Some were stationed outside, some within. All were loyal. He brought them into the temple's inner courts, swore them to secrecy, and then unveiled what no one had dared hope for in years, the living heir of David. Joash stepped forward, still small, his eyes wide with a mix of innocence and quiet strength. The commanders gasped. Some fell on their faces. Others raised their hands in awe. It was as though they were witnessing resurrection itself. The royal line was not broken. It had been preserved, like a flame under glass. Jehoiada's voice thundered like a prophet of old. "Behold the king's son. Let each of you do as I command, for the hour of deliverance has come." The plan for the coup. Jehoiada was not a man of war, but he understood divine strategy. He laid out his plan with precision. 1/3 of the priests and Levites would stand guard at the king's house. Another third would be stationed at the gate of Sur. The final third would stand watch at the gate behind the guard. They were to rotate in shifts and protect the boy at all costs. The people of Judah, common citizens, temple workers, and royalists in hiding, were called quietly. No loud proclamation, no trumpet, not yet. Just word passed from ear to ear, house to house. "Come to the temple. Something is happening." And they came. Like a river breaking its dam, they came from all over Judah. Men who had lost hope. Women who had wept for their sons slaughtered years ago. Elders who remembered the reign of Jehoshaphat. They flooded the temple courts with anxious anticipation. They didn't know what to expect, but they sensed heaven was moving. Jehoiada handed out weapons, ancient spears and shields once belonging to King David himself. Artifacts of war, once symbols of glory, now returned to purpose. These were no ordinary weapons. They carried history, weight, and power. Every soldier was placed in position, swords drawn. The temple, once desecrated by false worship, now glowed with righteous preparation. The crowning of the true king. And then it happened. In the center court, before a hushed crowd, Jehoiada stepped forward. Joash was led beside him. A hush swept through the thousands gathered. Men held their breath, children clung to mothers, the wind itself seemed to pause. Jehoiada lifted a crown, the crown of David, and placed it on the boy's head. "Long live the king," someone shouted. Then another. Then hundreds more. Until the walls of the temple thundered with the cry, "Long live the king! Long live King Joash!" The sound rolled over Jerusalem like an earthquake. People wept. Priests raised their hands. Trumpets screamed to life. It was not a coup, it was a divine resurrection of a forgotten covenant. Heaven itself seemed to shout with them. The queen hears the uprising. In the palace across the city, Athaliah jolted from her seat. The sound of trumpets stabbed her ears. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't heard that sound in years, not since her husband died. Not since she took the throne through murder. "What is that noise?" she hissed. She called her guards. Messengers ran. The sounds only grew louder, shouts, clanging weapons, cries of celebration. Panic crept into her bones. She stormed toward the temple herself, flanked by soldiers, her heart a storm of fury and fear. As she pushed through the temple gates, the scene hit her like a blade to the chest. There, on the royal platform, stood the impossible. Joash, the boy she thought she had killed, standing crowned and guarded by an army of temple warriors. Jehoiada stood beside him, arms raised in holy triumph. The people were shouting. The priests were rejoicing. And Athaliah saw her end written in their eyes. Athaliah's scream cut through the crowd like venom. "Treason! Treason!" she shrieked, her voice unhinged. But the people didn't echo her. No one stepped forward. No swords were drawn in her defense. The crowd had chosen their king. Her voice, once filled with fearsome authority, now sounded desperate and hollow. Jehoiada raised his hand. "Take her," he said calmly, eyes never leaving the child king. The temple guards surrounded Athaliah. She realized too late that she had no allies left. Her Baal priests had not come. Her mercenaries were silent. Her control had crumbled the moment truth entered the light. "Do not kill her in the house of the Lord," Jehoiada commanded. "Let her be taken outside." They dragged her through the horse gate, the very gate where she once rode proudly as queen. The streets that once bowed to her now turned their faces away. No one cried out for mercy. No one mourned. And at the gate, justice was swift. Her reign ended not with a royal burial, but with blood. The same blood she had shed to ascend the throne now stained the ground beneath her. The queen was dead. A new day in Judah. When the sword fell, so did a curse. A darkness lifted from Judah. It wasn't just the end of a tyrant, it was the beginning of revival. Jehoiada, with his aged hands, took the boy king by the shoulders and led him into the palace. For the first time in 7 years, a rightful heir of David walked the royal halls. The people sang. Trumpets rang again. The idols of Baal were torn down. The altar of Yahweh was restored. Jehoiada didn't stop at the crowning. He made a covenant between the Lord, the king, and the people. It wasn't just about a new monarch. It was about returning Judah to the God who made it. And the boy, Joash, though young, stood with the fire of destiny in his eyes. He wasn't just saved, he was chosen. When the dust of rebellion settled and the echoes of Athaliah's screams faded into silence, Judah stood at a crossroads. The queen was gone. The rightful king was on the throne. But as the city began to breathe again, a deeper question loomed: what was left behind in the wake of her reign? This was no ordinary chapter in Judah's history. Athaliah's years on the throne were not just marked by tyranny and fear, they were soaked in blood, stained with idolatry, and suffocating under the heaviness of betrayal. Her story was more than politics. It was a spiritual war. And its aftermath carried lessons not just for kings, but for every heart that had dared to forget who their true king was. Even after Athaliah's body was buried far from the royal tombs, denied the honor of the kings she sought to replace, her name continued to linger in whispers. Not in reverence. Not in nostalgia. But in warning. Mothers told their children her story at night, not as a tale of power, but as a reminder of how ambition can mutate into evil when left unchecked. Priests recited her deeds when calling Judah back to the covenant. Her name became synonymous with spiritual rebellion. And when the prophets spoke of judgment, their tones often mirrored the dread that fell on the city during her reign. Unlike Jezebel, her mother, her model, her madness, Athaliah was not destroyed by outsiders or assassinated in secrecy. She was overthrown in the house of God, in front of her own people, by the very covenant she tried to crush. Her legacy would not be grandeur. It would be a warning carved into the memory of a nation. The anatomy of evil, what made Athaliah so dangerous? She wasn't the first woman to hold power in the ancient world. She wasn't the first queen in Judah. But what set Athaliah apart wasn't merely her role, it was her soul. Her wickedness didn't begin on the throne. It had deep roots in her upbringing. Raised in the palace of Ahab and Jezebel, she grew up in a world where Baal worship was not just common, it was policy. She saw prophets hunted. She saw shrines built to idols. She witnessed Jezebel's cunning, how lies and seduction controlled kings and armies. And she learned, Athaliah didn't just marry into Judah, she infiltrated it. Her marriage to Jehoram was more than political. It was a bridge for Baal, a Trojan horse for idolatry into David's city. So when Jehoram died and her son Ahaziah briefly reigned, she had her chance. And when Ahaziah was killed, the door swung wide open. In a fury of rage and ambition, she slaughtered her own grandchildren, destroying the very bloodline she had married into, just to ensure no rival remained. This wasn't just murder. It was spiritual warfare. She wasn't trying to rule Judah, she was trying to erase David's line. And what does that mean spiritually? David's line carried the covenant of God. The promise of a future Messiah. The hope of redemption. By attacking that, Athaliah wasn't just trying to be queen, she was waging war against the promise of Jesus Christ himself. That is why her reign is so chilling. She tried to kill the future of salvation. But despite her efforts, despite the blood she spilled, despite her alliances with Baal and her brutal executions, one child survived. Just one. Joash. Too small to fight. Too young to understand. Hidden in the temple, beneath the very shadow of God's altar, protected by a priest and a mother who defied the queen's terror, he lived. And in that moment, a silent truth thundered across history. God does not need an army to fulfill his plan. Sometimes, all he needs is one child hidden in the temple. Joash was not rescued by soldiers or by political maneuvering. He was saved through faith and obedience. Jehosheba, the princess who risked everything to hide him, and Jehoiada, the priest who raised him in secret, they became instruments of divine preservation. Athaliah thought she had destroyed the covenant, but in reality, her violence only revealed the power of God's protection. The echo of legacy, what her reign teaches us today. Athaliah's story may be ancient, but its shadows still stretch into modern times. 1. Unchecked ambition leads to destruction. Athaliah didn't start out as a monster, but her desire to control, to hold power, to silence God's voice, slowly turned her into one. When ambition becomes more important than obedience, even those raised among God's people can fall into darkness. 2. Spiritual compromise in leadership destroys nations. Her marriage to Jehoram introduced Baal worship to Judah. Her personal sin became national policy. What began as a political alliance became spiritual genocide. Leaders who forsake God open doors they cannot close. 3. God always preserves a remnant. Even when the darkness seems total, even when every heir is slaughtered, God keeps his promises. One child, one priest, one faithful woman. That was all he needed to break the grip of a queen possessed by power. 4. Idolatry always demands blood. Baal worship was not harmless tradition. It was violent, seductive, and demonic. It required child sacrifice, sexual corruption, and the rejection of God's truth. Athaliah's devotion to Baal wasn't symbolic. It cost real lives. And in the end, it cost her own. 5. The temple is not just a building, it's a place of preservation. Joash wasn't hidden in a fortress or in a cave. He was hidden in God's house. The presence of God was his shield. In times of corruption and chaos, those who remain rooted in the presence of the Lord are preserved for purpose. The quiet strength of the faithful. Though Athaliah ruled with fear, though she held the throne and commanded armies, her power was no match for the quiet faith of the righteous. Jehosheba didn't hold a sword, but she saved a king. Jehoiada didn't ride into battle, but he led a revolution. Joash didn't cry out for vengeance, but his survival proclaimed justice. In a time when evil wore a crown, it was the faith of the unseen that changed the course of history. The lesson? Don't underestimate the hidden faithfulness of God's people. The loudest voice isn't always the truest. The most visible power isn't always the strongest. God often works in whispers, in secrets, in shadows, until the day comes when he raises the curtain and shows that he was never out of control. Through Athaliah's story, we see how Satan has always tried to destroy the line that leads to Jesus. Cain killed Abel. Pharaoh tried to drown the sons of Israel. Herod tried to kill every male child in Bethlehem. And Athaliah tried to wipe out the royal family. Every time, the pattern is the same. If Satan can cut off the line of promise, he thinks he can stop the Redeemer from coming. But every time he fails. Because no matter how dark the season, God is always 10 steps ahead. Joash lived. And through Joash, the line of David continued. And from that line came Jesus, the true king, the final heir, the one no death could touch. Final reflections. Athaliah may be gone from the throne, but her spirit, the spirit of rebellion, ambition, and godlessness, still tempts hearts today. She serves as a mirror to every soul that forgets God, to every leader who sacrifices truth for control, and to every generation that thinks God's plan can be silenced. But Joash's survival reminds us, God's promises never die. His covenants never break. And even when all seems lost, heaven is still writing the story. The legacy of Athaliah, though drenched in evil, became the backdrop for one of the most stunning acts of divine protection in history. Her rise and fall became the stage on which God's sovereignty shone brightest. She meant to destroy destiny, but in doing so, she revealed that no one can cancel what God has already ordained. Brief prayer. Heavenly Father, Thank you for preserving the line of David even in the darkest of days. As we reflect on the legacy of Athaliah, open our eyes to the dangers of pride, idolatry, and rebellion. Teach us to remain faithful even when evil surrounds us. May the hidden faith of Jehoshaphat and Jehoiada inspire us to trust your plans, even in silence and secrecy. Protect us from the spirit of Athaliah that still roams today, and help us cling to the promise of your Son, Jesus Christ, the true King whose throne will never end. In Jesus' name, then. The throne is safe, but is the heart of the king? This story isn't over. The next episode will shake you. Make sure you've subscribed and hit the bell so you're first to see what happens when the boy king rises. And share this episode with someone who needs to see how God protects his promise, no matter the odds.